Welcome to Euronews Debates. I'm Maeve McMahon and we're broadcasting from the European Parliament here in Brussels, where thousands of people gathered this week to discuss shaking up the economic growth model here in Europe and capitalism as we know it. Among them was the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who had a lot to say on the topic that might have even shaken the financial markets. Is this just another conference, or could we start seeing a real change in policies that put people and the planet ahead of pure profit? Euronews' Christopher Pitchers has more.
Day one of the BeyondGrowth conference in Brussels, and something is in the air. It's not every day that so many people from all walks of life and across the political spectrum gather to discuss such consequential economic change. Most people attending the conference believe that GDP growth is no longer the best indicator for determining economic policy. They want a more holistic approach that incorporates, among other things, sustainability, circularity, and general well-being. It's an idea that's far away from current mainstream thinking, but not as far as you might think.
The growth model centered on fossil fuels is simply obsolete.
Many in the room would like her to have gone further, with critics saying her support for moving beyond just fossil fuel growth is too narrow. But it's a start for a conference that 5 years ago only had one commissioner attending, let alone the European Commission President herself. The hard work begins now, though, as lawmakers and other stakeholders start the difficult process of trying to turn debate into policy and move beyond growth.
The big question now, how to turn these debates into policy, how to change a model that's been churning for years. To answer these questions, I'm delighted to be joined by Marie Toussaint, French member of the European Parliament and Vice Chair of the Greens EFA Group. Very welcome. Timothy Paric, a social scientist and writer from France. We're also joined by Anuna de Wever, the Belgian climate activist, the face of the Friday for Future movements here in Belgium. And we're also joined by Ludovic Voet, the Confederate Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation. Great to see you all. Welcome to Euronews. Thanks for being with us here and bringing us all a little bit inside this conference. So my first question to you is, if economic growth is destroying the planet, why has it been driving the European Union for decades? Should we start with yourself?
Yeah, well, that's a huge question and a good question, actually. What we notice now is that we're overcrossing 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries. So we speak a lot about climate change, but also about biodiversity, about toxic substances, or about water. And we really need to act. And what did feed this overcrossing of the planetary boundaries? Well, it's the race for profits, as you underlined in the beginning. This dogma of growth that is supposed to bring all the happiness in the world. It's supposed, I mean, that's what we've been told for ages, it's supposed to bring us a redistribution of wealth, so social equality. It's also supposed to bring us technologies that would save the environment that we are destroying. And it's supposed to solve all our problems that we have. So everyone is just running after growth. Would it be private companies wanting to chase profits? They need this growth. And political leaders that also pretend that purchasing this growth is going to solve all the issues that we have. And we can definitely see that this is not working, that we are overcrossing these planetary boundaries, putting at life the survival of humanity and of many other species indeed, and not solving the social equality issue.
From Ituk there, and how can you answer that question? And why has it been this business as usual for so long?
Well, the role of trade union in history has always been to set the human boundaries and to say what are the rights of workers and to make sure, and it's still ongoing. I think that now we have also, since decades, the role to put the planet boundaries and not to oppose the planet and the human boundaries. That's what we name just transition in the trade union movement. We need to plan a transition that is possible for people so that they have quality jobs, that they have social protection, that this works. And of course, this goes against the logic of rapid profit. And that's what we have to change in society.
Is it possible, Anuna, to be able to change this? That is, of course, the big question that everyone's asking themselves.
Yeah, it's actually interesting to listen to you because I think there's a big generational thing here in that a lot of the young people that I've met at this conference, and myself, I'm 21 years old, we're not actually obsessed with growth. Like, we're just looking at this concept now with scientists, hard science, with social sciences, and we're understanding that it's actually done much more harm than good. So for our generation, growth is something that we are actually actively fighting. And this whole paradigm of growth and this obsession with growth in the European Union is not something that we've been a part of yet.
So what are you obsessed with? What's keeping you up at night?
We're obsessed with well-being, I think, and equality, and understanding that if we want to live in a society and in a world where equality is a priority, I think that degrowth is a very fundamental part of that.
And you mentioned well-being, Anuna de Wever. Well-being, of course, that was a big topic of the week's conference, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's just get the perspective from yourself, social scientist. You've written a lot of books on various topics that have been discussed this week here in the European Parliament. What's your take on all this?
Well, for a few decades, we have believed that somehow we could keep growing and polluting less at the same time. We call it green growth. We talked of decoupling the two. But now, like, science has shown us with hundreds of studies that actually that decoupling is not happening. So right now, we have this obsession with GDP, which is a 100-year-old indicator, which is a bit strange because it's completely decorrelated from well-being in high-income countries. But we're also facing the unsustainability of the pursuit of growth. So degrowth basically is a plan B of we've tried to green growth. That's not going to work. Now, I think that should be acknowledged as a fact as a result of the latest IPCC report. And so we do need to organize a democratically planned downscaling of production and consumption in high-income countries and organize it so that it can be done in a way that is both equitable and convivial.
Okay. Do you think that this obsession with GDP is killing the climate, or killing the planet, excuse me, Ludwig?
Yeah, for sure. I think that growth objectives, when we are discussing growth objectives now, it's quite clear that growth is linked to more productivity. So it has also impact on workers. It has also impact on when politicians speak about growth, it's also activation of the unemployed, of the long-term sick, those who are sick. So it's putting more pressure and not speaking about what we should really speak about. It's what do we produce, how many people we need to produce this, how many hours we need to work to do this. So the intent behind the discussion on post-growth, beyond growth or green growth, I think what we really have to focus on is what we want to produce as a society. Do we produce already enough? Do we share this? Is it equitable? And can we share this properly while giving people a hope that tomorrow we will still have quality jobs? So it should not be at the expense of quality jobs.
Okay, shouldn't be at the expense of quality jobs. Marie Toussaint, do you think you can really have growth for good, or do you need to now start focusing on degrowth?
Well, I think that focusing on growth is a mistake. Focusing on GDP is a mistake. And if we talk about degrowth, we absolutely need to have a material degrowth. We need to have a degrowth of emissions of greenhouse gases. We need to have a degrowth of consumption of a lot of materials, of production of toxic products such as PFAS or plastic that are polluting everything, destroying our health, polluting our soils, our water. So we need to go in that direction and really wonder, and that's what Ludovic Voet was saying. We need to wonder, what do we need, and how do we ensure that this is created, and the rest is okay, and we just managed to do something else with our lives, and this is working. But for this, we really need to change the focus, because the European Union now, with its policy on stability, budgetary stability, is pushing to destroy what is needed, like social infrastructures, like investments in green reorientation, green transition. And it's actually pushing also to liberalize and financialize everything so that we can ensure that still the level of the growth is growing. And this is really not the right direction.
What would you say to that, Anuna?
Well, I think that it is about a fundamental reprioritizing what we find important in society. And I think for a long time, especially when Fridays for Future globally came on the streets, a lot of people said we need to keep ideology away from hard science and politics. But the the reality is that there is a big ideology in the growth paradigm, which is neoliberalism, and that's what we need to rethink right now. And I think not only degrowth, but also decolonization is going to be fundamental to systemically and institutionally change that.
Okay, well, you're all very much on the same side of the coin, so we wanted to also bring in a couple of other perspectives, as this was not just organised by one political group, this conference this week. In fact, there was 5 political groups on board, and one of those groups was the European People's Party. The Irish MEP Maria Walsh is part of that political party. Now, that political group would not be in agreement with a lot of the debates and ideas that were perhaps put on the table this week, but Maria Walsh, she slided off a little bit from her party line and spoke to our Christopher Pitchers for Euronews. Take a listen to what she had to say.
A sustainable economy is one that's fair and balanced. A certain cohort of people cannot continue to take, while other people, and a majority of people in our European Union and worldwide, are being left on the poverty lines. So we need to find balance.
Maria Walsh there, the Irish MEP, speaking to Christopher Pitchers a little bit earlier this week, stressing how you need to find a balance. Timothy, it's always about finding a balance, but how can you?
It's about finding a balance. The problem here, if we compare ecological footprints, so all the natural resources we're using, and we compare this to biocapacity, which is the carrying capacity of your ecosystems, you see that high-income economies, all of them, are just out of proportion. And the only way of getting back in proportion is to reduce production and consumption. And when we talk about degrowth, that lays out radical implications, because the current system we have, neoliberal capitalism, cannot degrow. It's not in its DNA. It's not one of the functions. So that means going post-capitalism, rethinking the role of businesses, phasing out for-profit mentality, rethinking the role of consumerism and materialism at the individual and sociological level. This means scrapping national accounting, GDP and everything else to measure well-being. So we're talking about a real paradigm shift.
Wow, that is a real paradigm shift that could take decades to be implemented.
I don't think so. That's the thing. When we're talking about technological solutionism, like, how long will it take to invent hydrogen plane and replace every fossil plane by an hydrogen plane? Develop the patent, work on it, exnovate the real plane, market it, advertise it. If we decide right now to be like, well, let's fly 50% less plane, you can do it by tomorrow.
But what about our viewers who are watching today saying, but that's not realistic? I mean, I have to pay my bills. I can't even afford to survive till the end of the month. There's a cost of living crisis in Europe. I'm struggling to survive. I've got lots of kids at home to feed. How do you translate that into their lives, that this world can be a reality as well for them?
Yeah, I think here we need also concrete policies. We need to discuss about concrete policies. And it's not only about scientific evidence and technological evidence. It's about convincing people. Society is about convincing people we can do this. And this, in the trade union movement, we ask them to do it through just transition. This means anticipation of change. Anticipation of change means that you can plan, that you can invest, that you can finance, that you can ensure to people that their voice are heard and that you invest in the future. But this cannot be done from one day to another. But for that, you need enabling environment to do that, not to put the climate against the people, not to put the people against the climate.
Sure. And just on convincing people, I mean, people don't like to be told what to do. People hate being preached at. So how do you tell people in a way that they will understand what's at stake here, what's at stake for the planet, what's at stake for the future, what's at stake for the future of their grandkids?
I think it's about involving people, honestly, and that's, I think, a big part of degrowth is that you have a democratically planned degrowth. So that means that you involve people through people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, you open up these fora, and every time that they've done that in the past, you see that people are actually in favor of these very progressive policies. And I think that right now we're producing and consuming a lot of crap that people don't need. And as we've stated before, I think in this conference, is that the political landscape is somehow democratic, but the economic landscape is not. People cannot decide how things are produced and consumed and where we get those messages, what are the mainstream narratives on production and consumption. And so I think involving people in those narratives and rethinking with them is actually very valuable. And it is one of the key things that degrowth is proposing, which is not part of capitalism right now, where people don't have a say.
Quick reaction to that?
Yeah, no, what I believe is that focalization on growth is also leading to give more money to those who already have money, and that people are very tired of that. And in the last years, with the concern growing for the environment, neoliberalism has used the environment to ensure that the money would still and even more go to always the same people. So we can see that in all actually sectors that we have. If we look at the industry, well, now with the reform of the ETS, people will have to pay a carbon tax, whereas industry still has free permits to go along until 2034. If we look at the fisheries, the quotas that were set in place in order to protect the fish, well, now they are profiting to the biggest boats, the ones who are destroying the resources, but also destroying the jobs of the local fishermen. And you can see that in all directions. So also, because when we want to protect and to come back to planetary boundaries, it's because of a question of justice. We want to ensure justice and equality all over the globe. So to go there, we need to have just policies, or else it's the other way around. It's not working for the planet, it's not working for the people.
And just on not working for the people, one major concern we've seen over the past couple of years as well is the amount of burnouts people are suffering from at work. You mentioned earlier, innen, diese, well-being. That was a big topic this week here at this event, here in the European Parliament. What about a 4-day week? I would like to get your take on a 4-day week. Is that something that employers should take on? Is that something that should be mandatory? Get your take on that first, Timothy.
Absolutely. So mechanically, if you want to contract production and consumption, that means, working hours will reduce. Sharing working time is a very good way of avoiding brutal unemployment during that transition. Not only a very good way of just fighting unemployment, but also of restoring a certain balance, fighting this burnout. And let's not stop at the 4-day work week. Let's actually completely recenter productivity towards the liberation of free time. So over the years, a performance economy is one that managed to shrink working time. And that should be a definition of success. Instead of measuring GDP every year, I want us to measure how many minutes we can nap per day while still satisfying the needs of everyone within planetary boundaries.
The liberation of free time, I like that. I think I'll be quoting you on that. And just on a serious note, burnouts cost 1.6 billion euros was spent on people here in Belgium suffering from burnouts. That's according to data I was looking up here in Belgium. What's your take? I know this is a big topic for yourself at ETUC.
Clear, the trade union movement has always steered the discussion on reduction of working time. But it's also important that to acknowledge we are in a moment where people, to pay their bills, they want to work more. If they have the possibility to work more, they take it because they have to pay their bills. So it means that to convince, we also need really to put in place policies that really show that you will not lose money by reduction of working time. You will not have to work more intensively by reduction of working time. The problem of how we discuss working time is often that it's at the expense of workers' rights. Even if you have less working hours, it would be more intense. It would be maybe with loss of wages. So it's something that we have to take into account, and maybe also in a context where we ask people to work more on a career, maybe we have also to not only discuss about the 4 days a week, but how many hours we work on a year, if it's possible to have additional holidays every 5 years, if you can work less years on the career. So working time as a whole has to be discussed not only through the 4 days a week, but which is an important entry point for people to see what it can mean.
Anuna?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with this. And I think that redistributing the way that we work and what we put our work in is super valuable. And I wrote down here earlier in the conference was said that 90% of the labor globally done for the production that we do for the neoliberalistic capitalistic paradigm is done by workers in the global south and peasants. And so I think that even just from an inequality perspective, having to redistribute that globally and deciding what are we going to put labor in and what do we not, and what do we again prioritize well-being wise is super valuable.
Brief.
Well, maybe just to complement that, if we work 4 days a week, we also need to have the social activity structure, education, childcare and stuff that goes together with it, right? So it's indeed an entire change of society, but it's a welcome one.
And you as an MEP, can you ever disconnect?
I'm trying to, but it's a bit different when when it's your passion and your job to save the planet, basically.
Like journalism,
you
it's a passion. I think it's very tricky to ever disconnect if you are a journalist. But now, back to the conference. So as I said earlier, 2,000 people were physically here in the European Parliament this week. I think 2,000 also joined online. But what happens next? What will come out of this conference, do you think, Timothy? Will anything really change?
I think first we realize that discourses of green growth are just empty promises. So we have to completely rethink the European Green Deal, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and just acknowledge the scientific work that has been done, showing that green growth is not going to happen. So we cannot afford to base the survival of our species on magical thinking. So I do hope that once this conference is over, we can actually work in rewriting a feasible strategy for sustainability, taking into account this very important point, which is the fact that economic growth we've been having in Europe for the last decades is not the magical result of the imagination of inventors. It results from the mass appropriation of energy, soil, water, and labor time from the global south. And so degrowth in already rich countries is absolutely necessary to liberate natural and human resources for sustainable development in the global south.
Okay. Ludovic?
Yeah, so what's next? For me, it's I'm going to Berlin by train. We have our Congress next week in Berlin as ETUC, and it will be also an important moment to discuss these issues. And we have a whole chapter discussing the economy, where we say the economy has to work for the people and the planet. So we have to find a way in order to have these massive investments in people and in quality jobs, while, of course, disinvesting in fossil fuel subsidies. And this will need a change, of course, in the European Green Deal, also taking into account the social consequence of the European Green Deal. So the climate objectives, it's fine, but the social consequence of the climate objectives, they are completely overlooked. So it's important that in 2024, we also steer the debate at national level, at European level during the elections towards a real just transition of the workforce that we can plan and that we can convince people of.
Okay, same question to you, Anuna. And also, do you also agree that you don't think the European Green Deal is fit for purpose?
No, absolutely not. No, because it is very growth-based. So I do think that there's going to be a lot that has to change there. And I think from an activist perspective, what we're going to be doing also from the streets is really try and build a movement of movements, because I feel like the climate movement needs to work with the workers' rights movement, needs to work with the decolonization movement, needs to work with the degrowth movement, because it is so all-encompassing, right? It is really a paradigm shift. So we need to build that movement of movements. We've been talking about it for so long, and it's really starting to happen. The fact that this conference is being organized right now, and there are so many young people here present, means that it is going to be a big future discussion. And I think in that, there's one fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves is, who are we even growing this economy for? If it is a very elitist, a few amount of people that can accumulate all of the wealth right now, then that is not an economy worth growing for anyways.
And perhaps maybe industry, the missing link as well here. They could perhaps come to the next Beyond Growth conference. Final word with yourself, our MEP around the table. Will you be bringing these ideas into your committee meetings? Will they be translated into policies? What will really come out of this meeting?
Well, there will be an after, and as there was a before. And this is a changing moment. First of all, we are opening the European Parliament. Largely, it has never been opened like that before, and we are opening the door to citizens to discuss about Beyond Growth. So as itself, it's a historical event. And then, indeed, we managed to organize this conference with MEPs from different political groups, with different stakeholders that are coming here. And this will be taken up in the next discussions within the European Parliament. I don't have so much hope that it changes the political landscape right now, and we see the right wing and the liberals going against nature policies and social policies that we are trying to set in place. But for the next terms, definitely it's going to change the discourse, the way we see and we deal with these very fundamental issues. So I really think there will be a before and an after.
Okay, very good. And just a final word with yourself, Timothy. Were you impressed with what the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said when she was at this event earlier this week? She did speak a little bit outside the box.
I was not impressed at all. I was actually very surprised. The European Green Deal was 2019. The situation has changed. The situation of ecosystem has changed, and now we're not on the course to get the Fit for 55. This is what science tells us. This is what the last IPCC tells us. So I would have expected a bit more critical reflection of what has been done until now, and meeting like, okay, guys, what we've done has not been enough. We want to do something new, and we're here to determine what that thing is, rather than just microwaving, all recipes that haven't worked.
OK, on that note, we're going to have to leave it there. Timothy Bree, thank you so much for being with us. And Marie Toussaint, French MEP, thank you so much too. Thank you to Anuna de Wever for being with us as well. And of course to Ludwig Woot. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon here on Euronews and of course Euronews.com.